England in 1040 was a kingdom between tempests. The Danish line ended abruptly with Hardicanut's death, leaving the throne open and the realm uncertain. The island still bore the marks of Danish rule, yet the old House of Wessex remained in memory, and Norman influence had seeped in through Emma's kin. Into this unsettled landscape stepped Edward, recalled from Normandy only a year before. The magnates wanted stability. What they received was a king shaped by exile and divided loyalties. Edward's lineage was a braid of competing claims. His father was Ethelred, that poorly advised king whose troubled reign left England exposed. His mother, Emma of Normandy, bound Wessex to the Norman ducal house and, through her second marriage to Canute, to the Danish royal line as well. From this union of Wessex, Normandy, and Denmark came Edward and his siblings, and with them a tangle of loyalties that would shape every decision once the crown came free. Here you can follow the bouncing crown, not including a further Danish interlude. Edward spent most of his youth in Normandy, driven there when Sweyn Forkbeard seized England in 1013. He grew to adulthood among Norman lords, speaking their tongue and absorbing their customs. When Hardicanute summoned him back in 1041, Edward returned as a man half English, half Norman in outlook. And when Hardicanute died the next year, the magnates chose Edward as king, perhaps hoping for calm after decades of upheaval. Whether they received calm or merely drift is another matter. Edward's Norman upbringing followed him to the throne. He brought Norman clerks, Norman knights, and Norman counselors, men he trusted more than the English nobility who had survived the Danish years. This did not endear him to the great earls. The English magnates saw these newcomers as intruders, and every appointment Edward made deepened the divide. The roots of 1066 were already growing, not in battlefields, but in court corridors. The greatest of the English magnates was Godwin, Earl of Wessex, whose power overshadowed the king's own. Edward married Godwin's daughter, Edith, a union meant to bind the realm together, though it bound Edward more tightly than he wished. Tensions between Edward's Norman circle and the Godwins erupted in 1051 to 1052. Godwin was driven into exile, but he returned with ships and support, and Edward was forced to restore him and dismiss many Normans. It was clear who commanded England's loyalties, and it was not the king. Unable to master his earls, Edward turned to a project he could shape, Westminster Abbey. On Thorney Island, he raised a church in the Romanesque style he admired from Normandy. The abbey was consecrated in December 1065, just as Edward's health failed. He lived only a few days more. Yet Westminster endured, becoming the burial place of kings and the stage for coronations long after Edward's own line had vanished. Edward and Queen Edith had no children, leaving the succession dangerously open. At some point, likely around 1051, Edward is said to have promised the throne to William of Normandy. Whether this was firm intent or a diplomatic murmur is impossible to know. Meanwhile, the Godwinsons, especially Harold, arranged matters so that when Edward died, the crown would be within reach. When Edward passed in January 1066, the throne became a prize for which men would kill and die. Long after his death, Edward's reputation brightened. In 1161, Pope Alexander III canonized him as Saint Edward the Confessor. He became the model of a gentle, pious king, a figure more at home in prayer than in politics. Yet his reign's instability paved the way for the Norman conquest. His Norman sympathies, his reliance on great earls, and his failure to secure an heir turned England into a battleground. A saint he may have been, but even saints cast long shadows. From saintly king to bishop bold, we trace the tales the chronicles told.